just bringing one more stupid synonym to natural or sparse properties. So that's, you know, think of talking about natural properties. But thanks for pointing that. Okay. Whew. More jargon coming your way. So I think that the minimality criteria that Schaffer talked about there is something to be salvaged, because all the time I've been talking about the fundamental kinds. I really think that the fermions and bosons and all these things are the best candidates we have. So I want to focus on the fundamental level first, and then see if there's anything else above that. So I'd have to address what Schaffer's case against this minimality criteria. It's cases based on gunk. I really don't want to go into a lot of detail about it, although I'm really excited about the topic. This is the idea that everything has a proper part. Well, that means that there's no atoms in the world. There's no end to how many times we can split the smallest things in the world. So contemporary physics thinks that electrons, for instance, are simples. They're fundamental particles. They're indivisible. If the world is gunky, that's not true. It doesn't matter if we can't instrumentally, if we can't actually go and split electrons. This is just the hypothetical idea that there could be some structure going all the way down, infinitely. There's never going to be a bottom level that you face. And you might think that, science supports this sort of idea in the way that so far we thought that we found atoms, Democritus thought that they found atoms already with the four fundamental kinds, I suppose, fire and water and so on. And not too long ago we thought that atoms are truly atoms. That's where their name comes from. They're indivisible. And now then there's protons and neutrons. Well, they turn out to have substructure. There's quarks that make up them. I don't know. All sorts of weird things come up when we... Sorry?
Aren't they waves?
Waves. That might be one way to look at it as well. Yeah. It'll change the description of how you pan this out a little bit, but it doesn't really matter what the relevant form of what we think of as particles is. The point is that you could have structure going all the way down. There could be waves where you didn't think that way. Okay, well, I mean, this might sound like a crazy idea, but it's
could they be turtles?
Sorry?
Could they be turtles all the way down?
Turtles, well, that's exactly the view. I mean, in some talks I have this picture of the turtles when I pitch the gun talk. I think it's really exciting, actually. So, I mean, as a side note, so the view that the structure is always the same, Schaffer has written about this himself. He calls it boring infinite descent. I don't think there's anything boring about it. I think it's really exciting. But the idea of boring is that there's always the same structure that repeats, that you wouldn't get more kinds. But I'm not going to go into detail about this. I've got a paper called Boring Infinite Descent if you're interested. But the point is there that I think that there's a better way to understand this minimality criterion. And here's a piece of jargon that does that. Minimal truth makers. Never mind. You can skip the stuff about electrons. I'll just give you the pitch. And that's as follows. I have a proposition. I have a claim. There's at least one bottle of beer in the fridge. Go and check the fridge. There's 12 bottles of beer in the fridge. Well, each one of those 12 bottles is a minimal truth maker for my claim that there's at least one bottle of beer in the fridge. Simple. Okay. So David Armstrong wrote about minimal truth makers, and I thought they serve some important purpose in metaphysics. He couldn't really pinpoint what the purpose is. Well, here's one purpose that they could serve. We can stop this, as it were, this regress that Schaffer talks about, this infinite descent, by pointing out that, hey, at some point the explanation stops here. Even if electrons have substructure, a proposition, a claim about electrons could be all we need to stop this this regress, as it were. Well, I'd like to talk more about that, but I shouldn't because I'm using more time than I should. the point is here that we can sometimes give the full scientific explanation that we're looking for without caring about what comes below. So, to use the beer example again, even though you know that the existence of all of those beer bottles, the single beer bottles that made through this claim, you know that the existence of those beer bottles depends on all sorts of things about laws of physics and the glass bottle, say the glass bottle having a rigid structure and the features of the liquid and so on. None of this is really relevant for the claim that there's at least one beer bottle in the fridge. The explanation stops there. You only have to go down that one level. Okay, so if that's the case, we can take care of the minimality criterion. But I also want to tweak the causality criterion, because a lot of physicists think that there's no causation at the fundamental level. Causation is actually a tricky topic for philosophers of science, because physicists don't typically talk about causation in the same sense as philosophers do. I mean, there's a huge debate about this, but we can get rid of that debate by tweaking the condition a little bit. Just say that whatever the natural properties are there, they are truth makers, or they feature in laws that concern fundamental physics. So this way we can combine the naturalness and their law-like form. They're featuring in law-like generalizations. But I don't think that that's a reason to think that law-like generalizations are a sign of naturalness. And I'm starting to look at the time and thinking maybe I shouldn't go through the whole of the last section, which is about the role of expanding significance. But where's the time? So I use slides. What do you think?
Can we have 20 minutes for discussion?
Yeah, so that would leave me a little.
So perhaps 15 minutes?
Yeah, I can go through this in that time. That's no problem. Okay, maybe I'll do it. So Michael Devitt is a great guy, important philosopher, and he has a theory about biological kinds. And I use his theory as a sort of a foil to show you here why you shouldn't think that it's just the explanatory significance that natural kinds play in scientific explanations or law-like generalizations that make them natural. So he thinks that, for instance, being a dog, controversial natural kind of anything, but nevertheless he says that it's undoubtedly a natural kind, exactly because it features in various historical and structural explanations. Of course it does. It features, we talk about dogs in all sorts of biological explanations. So if that's a sign of being a natural kind, or feature having natural properties, then we have to revise this picture a little bit. Explanatory significance, that's why he considers as central for kind unit. And here's a rough and ready definition of his version of natural kind realism. So a group would be natural if it's distinguished from other groups along these joints of reality. So far, so good. And a natural group constitutes kind only if it's explanatory significant. So the naturalness is here analyzed as explanatory significant, or in terms of explanatory significance. Now, in a way I like this, because that's exactly what we want to get out of natural kinds. We want to do scientific explanation in terms of natural kinds. That's the story about finding these new elements, these highly radioactive heavy elements that we haven't seen before. Well, because we have this theory about natural kinds, we can explain how we're able to discover these new elements. So I think explanatory significance is important, but I don't think it's important in quite the same way that David does. Now he assumes this mind-independent stuff. We've gone through that. But what's crucial is that he thinks that naturalness and explanatory significance go hand in hand. They always do We could compare this with Richard Boyd's, remember the HBC theory, suggesting that, here we go, naturalness of the naturalness of the kind consists in the kind's fulfillment of accommodation between perceptual and classified practices and causal structures. So the causal structures are where the explanation lies in as well. But we have to tie this to the scientific explanation if this sort of line is going to work. But the problem is that I don't think that this is going to address the original million challenge that we started with. How do we distinguish between the natural group of objects, the group of objects theory and natural properties and kind? Well, if we are understanding the explanatory significance of kinds as only those kinds that have some degree of naturalness, then we start going in circles here. We can't just identify the two without having a substantial account of explanatory significance that's going to be distinct of naturalness. Now, David does try to get around this problem, and he talks about, he gives us this controversial theory of biological species by talking about partly intrinsic essences. So I'm not going to go into detail here, but most biologists nowadays think that a biological kind should be identified just by the historical lineage. And DNA, for instance, doesn't really feature into the explanation. It's not the only view, but it's one popular view. Now, David thinks that that's not right. We have to take the DNA seriously, but we can also build in the historical lineage. So he's got a nice paper on this. I think it's called Resurrecting Biological Essentialism. So he tries to get around this, but I don't think that he can get around this altogether. Yeah, well, here's a quotation from the paper. So this is the basic form of the theory. Suppose that the generalization is all F's are P, and the explanatory intrinsic property is G. So it's agreed that ultimately it's because these F's have that intrinsic property G that they have P. And the question asks why we must take G to be this essential property of X. And his answer rests on the just argued claim that the generalization is law-like, that I, kind of sketched for you. Okay? Well, it's a nice story, but I think that the problem is that there are law-like generalizations that do not feature natural kinds in this sense. And here we get to the view that all the explanatory work required here could be done just by the natural properties. So I'm trying to cash out my promise of getting back to this issue. Why won't that work? Well, there's a couple of reasons. In general, this is something where I'm in agreement with Alex and Bird. He has a paper that's just out called The Metaphysics of Natural Kinds, which lays out these options. He says that so natural kinds, if you associate natural kinds just with the inductive success, it promotes an over-liberal conception of natural kinds. I agree. And here's a case that Bird has built before in his critique of Lowe's theory that involves Coulomb's law. Never mind the scientific details. The idea is just this. Coulomb's law applies to all sorts of charged particles that you have. It's a law of electrostatic interaction. Like charges repel and unlike charges attract. You know, pretty sort of basic law in physics. Now, where do we put in the natural kind in this law? The explanatory significance right of the law is supposed to be combined with the natural kind. Well, the only answer that seems to be available, as Bird points out, is something like material body or a charged body. That should be a natural kind. But that does not look like a plausible type of natural kind. We didn't think that that's something that's responsible for the explanatory significance of the law. So if we go this way, it'll involve taking some strange, revising our idea of natural kinds. For what it's worth, I've talked about this to Lowe, and he bites the bullet here. He thinks that yes, there are such things as massive bodies, charged bodies that are close to the natural kind, but the view has its cost. So that's one reason why I don't think that's the likely likely explanation. Here's another one from Peter Godfrey Smith. We could have some cases where just a random sampling of sufficiently many cases would give us the explanation that we're looking for, the explanation for this, or justification for this law-like generalization. So take ravens. All ravens are black, right? Well, we just sample as many ravens as we can, and ultimately we might be satisfied that we have the explanation that we were looking for, without any sort of theory, like this sort of heavy theory in the background. Now, this is not to say that we've solved the problem of induction, right? That's another issue. But in some cases, we might have enough of a justification for our generalization without assuming natural kinds to do the work. Okay. All in all, I think that on this view, this full FSAR P type generalization, well, we can account for them in some cases without postulating natural kinds. But like I said, I do have some sympathy towards the idea that explanatory significance is what we're looking for here, and that's why we postulate kinds. So it has a role to play. But even if that is the case, then I think that the kinds could ground the explanation, but not everything that's explanatory has to involve the kinds. Well, I won't bore you with the details, but ultimately I want to combine this with a version of microstructural essentialism. That's where we're going to get the story. That's going to be my equivalent to David's story about the intrinsic biological essentialism. And that's part of that story is in the paper that might have been distributed as a background reading. Natural kind essentialism, revisited is the title. Okay, and then I have some sort of theory about how this combines with laws of nature, which is another important thing why we should have a theory of natural kinds. I don't think I need to say too much about this, except that today I've given you a picture about these fundamental kinds. But ultimately, I think that an interesting and important question is going to be whether there are kinds featured in the higher sciences and the special sciences. So my personal view, for what it's worth, is that I don't think that biological kinds are, biological species, this is important, because I don't think that they're kinds at all. I think that the sort of debate that we've had about them in philosophy of biology and metaphysics is proof enough that we're not going to find a reliable criterion for their kindhood. If there were to be kinds, then something like David's strategy might be the closest thing we can have. But since I think that microstructure will play a role, the usual story about historical lineage defining the kind is not going to be the trick of my view. But I do think that there might be some natural kinds in the higher sciences, at least in chemistry. I think water is a classic example of a natural kind. I think that it's been taken as a natural kind way too easily. I think that there's a difficult story to be told why it is a natural kind and it is a natural kind. And that has to do something with identifying how the various things about the microstructure of water, H2O, right? The hydrogen oxygen atoms, how they're coming together in the relevant way produces the chemical properties that we know and love. That water is a potable liquid that boils at about 100 Celsius and is liquid at room temperature and so on. Okay, so there's a lot of stuff to be done to get this full story out. I'm done anyway, so you can have the first question.
Well, let's thank you before I was just going to suggest that I don't think you have to get into the issue of the special scientists. You can just jump into the book. Either things are reducible to physics or they're not. If they're reducible to physics, then the physical laws and properties are the fundamental ones. If they're not, then the biological, those are fundamental too. And so you don't have to sort of get into the muddy waters of addressing that, because it's got to be one or the other.
Yeah. I mean, I guess you're right, but in a way I'd like to separate the question about whether there are special science laws or special science kinds from the reduction question.
But you can accommodate either.
Yeah, that's the hope anyway. That's true. No, yeah, I mean, I'm on board with that, thanks. I guess my only worry is that I wouldn't want to leave it up to, you know, future work when reduction is either established or utterly denied to figure out whether there could be kinds of special sciences, which I kind of have to do if I just delegate the question to the
No, no, you'll have kinds, they'll either be emergent or fundamental. So
Oh, right.
Yeah. So you're not waiting, it's just which one it is depends on whether or not the reductionist project works.
Oh, yeah.
And
Okay,
you're happy
yeah.
either way.
Then it could be, yeah, then it could be in certain cases, you know, the answer could be different in different cases. Yeah. Well, that's nice, yeah. I like that. For what it's worth, I do think that the reductionist project is not going to go through all the way through. There's a book coming out by Robin Henry called The Metaphysics of Chemistry, where he tries to argue that chemistry is not reducible to physics. But it's not to be determined. Bill had a question.
Well, I remember one of the great philosophical experiences of my life, Quine giving a lecture at my alma mater. And his main point was that because of the nature of physics, that there are no objects anymore. Instead, there are relationships. And so you can't really break, well, he didn't say this in this term, but you can't break things down to kinds anymore, apart from the sets that we group them by through various levels of discourse. So in a sense, the nature of kinds comes from the significance that we give various elements of our experience.
I don't like the conventionalist tone.
Yeah, that's...
No, so let me ask, so do you have in mind a certain kind of structuralist explanation? Because you said...
Well, I remember what he said, okay, so you can have, it used to be you have particle A in one box and particle B in another box, and then if you had the particles switch, you now have particle B in this side and A on this side. But actually, the physicists don't think of that because all they have is the arrangement of how many particles are where. And so you know, now of course there were particles, you know, that's for sure. But at the same time, it's still the arrangement that we notice. So I would have called it pragmatism, really, at the time. But
well, I mean, I was thinking that you wanted to refer to the maybe an even more radical view that there's no things in the conventional sense, which logic structural realists like James Laderman and Don Ross think that everything must go, right? Which is all the raging also science and metaphysics. So in that view, there would just be relations rather than particles at all, no particles. But I think that's okay, even if it complicates matters quite a bit, telling this sort of story. I'm not quite sure how to respond to the what you call pragmatist story. I mean, maybe not in all cases you'd have to give that explanation. You might have some cases where you want to have a non-pragmatist explanation. But well, maybe I won't go into a structuralist issue now unless someone else is interested. I have questions here. You. Yeah. Okay.
Okay. So clearly, kinds are ways of distinguishing ideas. So one thing is not like the other thing because of its kind, or
right.
a thing is like another thing because of its kind. At what point does that start? Obviously, it doesn't exist in a void. Kinds don't exist in a void. If you fill the void with one thing, kinds still don't exist unless. Does it start with one kind, or do you have to have variety in order for kinds to be constructed in the first place?
Oh, I see. Well, I'm not sure if I see, but I'll try to respond, and then you'll tell me if I didn't see. So is the idea? Could we have the kind structure emerging like one by one? So now there's one kind, now there's two, or do they all have to come together at the same time?
No, more. At what point are there kinds? Is it only if many, many things exist, or if only one thing exists, is it still a kind?
Oh, okay. I guess it will depend on what kind of thing it is. Well, maybe this will help. So on my view, if you take the natural kinds as a fundamental category, it doesn't really matter what exists in terms of concrete entities. The kinds will be abstract. So, like we talked a little bit earlier, you can have the kinds without them having any instances. So this is a kind of a debate that's in the literature about universals as well. Whether you need to have the universals instantiated, as they say. So if you think of kinds as abstract entities, you don't have to care what exists in the world, materially as it were. The structure could still be there. So it's in a way, you can think of it as a constraining structure. So all the kinds are already defined in this blueprint, if you like, of the world. But whether things of certain kinds pop into existence, or how many things of that kind pop into existence, is a question on top of that as well. So if that view is right, which I've given you too much reason to think that it is, but if it is right, then your world where there's just the one object, presumably would be some kind of object, so that would be fine. But there would still be this structure of the kinds.
So, if I'm hearing you correctly, kinds exist even if there's no instantiated, or if there is no instance of the kind existing.
That's
So,
yeah.
in a void, there are still kinds. Even if nothing exists, there are kinds.
Yeah.
Weird.
In a way.
Sounds platonic.
Yeah. So think of it as a constraint rather than something that's out there to be touched. It's constraints on the structure, constraints on what there could be rather than what there is. I think I had an order going there.
I'm concerned with what kind of process do you really go through to determine a natural kind, be it fundamental or otherwise. It's like,
Yeah. That's a good point.
do natural kinds exist due to our perception of division in the universe, or even though they exist abstractly, is that abstraction, kind of like a Plato's form kind of abstraction, or is it like something that we've come up with, abstraction?
Right. So here's the way I think about how we get evidence for natural kinds, and maybe that will answer at least part of your question. I'm thinking that the success of science, in a way, that we can have progress in science, is going to depend on our ability to sometimes latch on to real kinds in the world, or into this proper structure of the world. So in that sense, they're independent, but I mean not necessarily in the Platonic sense, but that would be that's one version. My colleague just defended that sort of version, but I think that's going a step further. But wait, there was another part to your question which I now forgot.
It was just, do natural kinds exist due to our concepts of division and perception? Like,
Oh, right. Yes. Good. So briefly, my answer would be no. They don't exist because of that. But our concepts and might be evidence, or might be evidence for the existence of some kind. But I mean, I don't think that all of them would be successfully latching on to genuine natural kinds. We knowingly make all sorts of classifications that aren't supposed to reflect anything more than our own preferences. And I don't think that in those cases we're making natural kinds, we might be making different kinds of kinds. Like think of the currency case that I talked about. There's nothing in the ontological structure of the world that corresponds to currency, I don't think. But we still think of them as very, very genuine. You know, your money buys you stuff. Not sure if I quite addressed you there, but we can get back to that.
I'll accept it. It's good.
Okay.
It's good.
Thanks. I think
I'm Scott, nice to meet you.
Scott, all right.
Yeah, so Quine wants to reduce kinds to sets.
Right, yeah, I
Okay.
probably didn't do justice.
And I saw the elephants on the poster.
Oh,
There's a
I didn't put the
poster.
elephants.
I didn't think you put it on there for this time.
So sorry.
I was so excited.
I knew
I thought,
that was-
I was like, this guy's gonna talk about natural kinds with like species. And then at the end, you're like, well, I don't think kinds really apply to species. So what I think you think, yeah?
Provocative.
Yeah, it's, you got me here.
I probably promised, I mean, if you saw the abstract, I probably promised to say something about it as well.
So what I
Sorry.
wondered then is, does this guy think that kinds are reducible to physics? And if so, how is that any different from Quine's position?
Well, I mean, various ways, because I think that there are universals. Mine would be like that.
Yeah.
So, yeah. I guess I also think that the reducibility question is still open, as we discussed earlier. So I won't buy the full Quine project by any means. I mean, I might buy some aspects of it. That absolutely.
So if it's open, why not, what stops you from getting into the issue of species and gender?
Nothing stops me. I was just at a conference on social kinds, in fact.
Okay,
Uh,
so you think gender is a kind, a natural kind?
I think it's a kind. I don't think that it's necessarily a natural kind. So here we get to the tricky terrain. I don't quite know what would be the natural property that would be responsible for some of these distinctions. So I think that they're all candidates. So all these classifications are certainly candidates for being natural kinds. But I don't think that anything is necessarily lost if we say that, well, they weren't natural kinds, they're some sort of different kinds. It's just that the resemblance is result of something else than a natural property. So here's what I think of, I don't really have anything in print defending this, but here's what I think of biological species. At best, we might have a single distinction here, a single natural kind, and that's a living being. That seems general enough to me to fit the bill. I mean, I don't say that that's uncontroversial because then we have to define that, but that's
Yeah,
you know,
so
it's
one
just
last,
like-
because I thought you might go there, and I wondered, could there be a kind within a kind?
Oh, yeah. So yeah, we can have a substructure. Yes. I mean, there's various ways then that you could go in how to.
So if we
Catch
have
out
the
stuff,
kind of a
don't
living being, then we could say there are human kinds, there are elephant kinds.
Yeah, yeah. You could do that. I mean, people have toyed that with something like the isotopes of elements as well. For instance, you think that your hydrogen is your higher order kind, and various isotopes of hydrogen are its subkinds. So you could go this way, but it's not then entirely clear to me what the ontological status of the subkinds will be here.
Yeah.
So are they dependent on the higher order kind, or what's going on? But I mean, there's an interesting space of possibilities to develop that as usefulness. So it would be one way to go. Yeah.
I mean, I was just intriguing because it's like this adventure. Like, what if you applied it to race?
Well, I wouldn't, but
Yeah, right.
But I mean,
But you could. I
he's
mean,
also saying
Yeah.
natural kinds carve up reality, or the point was like natural kinds carve up reality at
Yeah.
the joints. But like there's, if you think of it purely from the human perspective, you're going to see a lot of things that are specific to us. But that doesn't necessarily carve up reality in a realistic way. Just because humanity is going to have genders and races doesn't mean that is a kind that is applicable.
Natural.
I think that the confusion might be over the definition of natural, rather than not thinking like it doesn't happen naturally, because like, all of these kinds obviously happen naturally.
oh yes.
but
Yeah.
to call it a natural kind would imply something more than that it occurs.
That's spot on, yeah.
Thanks.
Joe?
Back to the million problem.
Oh, yeah.
So why not consider natural properties, any natural properties as constituting kind, or and Devitt's response is only those natural properties that are explanatorily significant constitute kind.
Mm-hmm.
And then you raise some problems with that. What's the alternative that you're proposing to avoid the million problem? That's where I.
Right. I didn't really give you the full story, so I try to say some things about this in terms of chemistry in this natural kinds paper. But let me see when I have
It's
that.
easier for us to go back.
What's that?
You need your handout.
Yeah, I guess I do. So
It's not explanatory
10,
significance.
oh yeah,
What else?
the original one. No. So the explanatory significance issue is relevant, but I don't think that it always has to involve kinds at all, or even natural properties at all. So you can have explanatory successes and more like generalizations without having these cases. So that's against Devitt effect really. I mean that doesn't, for my part, that doesn't really address the question. So I want to do it's kind of a similar move that Devitt attempts just with the intrinsic biological essentialism, that I want to identify the microstructure as microstructure essentialism is the defining case here. So maybe I should have something on that here as well, but I've already got too much stuff.
So is that the like the fermions? It's what they are essentially, rather than the properties they have. There's not a cluster of properties.
Yes,
And
the
so that's
dispositional
what
essentialist story that we're
And
talking
so
about.
that's what gives you a fundamental.
That's pretty much the line of review. But I mean, there are various problems that need to be settled there, and the one that I've looked at is the case of water, because it's such a studied example. So I think that you still have to give this story about how the microstructure of the water determines how we identify the kind usually. So you get the causal layer, as it were, or the causal profile out of the macrostructure, out of the level of water that we're able to observe. But the link between the microstructure, the H2O that's down there, and that macrophysical causal profile mechanism is what's the interesting one. And it turns out to be quite a difficult case to make, even for chemists. And the classic cryptic department just kind of assumes that there is such a story. And one more thing to say about this. With the fundamental kinds, I think that just talking about causal mechanism is not going to be enough. This is Max Kistler recently nicely made this point. The mechanistic story that Boyd, for instance, gives, it always relies on identifying the causal mechanism by the parts of the kind, the cluster, right? But if you have a fundamental kind, like an electron, say, there's not going to be any story that the mechanistic approach can give you about why the properties of the electron, like charge and spin and mass, come together in the same way. So that's kind of what the other way. But yeah, admittedly, I didn't really give you a story today about how to address this challenge properly. It turns out to be quite difficult, which is probably why we still talk about it, even though it was introduced in the 1800s. Okay, did Did I miss something?
Do we still use the expression "to be" as to be the value of a variable, or is that passé?
Well, I don't. I've got a discussion about that in the forthcoming textbook that you can buy in all good bookstores in November.
And all of this will be included.
With the microstructural essentialism, is your view incompatible with the W universe then?
Oh, well, not necessarily. If I'm able to address Schaffer's case against the minimality constraint that I talked about, I went through that pretty quickly. That's where something more would need to be said, I think. But there will be some problems if the world is infinitely complex, as it were. Because on that view, it seems like there would have to be infinitely many natural kinds. And that seems like a bad thing.
Yeah, I was thinking if it gets down to like a homeomerous level where it's always the same as you cut it, then there is no microphysical structure. So how could you have an essentialism? Would you have to become like a functionalist or something like that to make up the universe?
Could be attempted, yeah. I mean, not particularly attractive. So, I'm in two minds about this. So, I think that some arguments against this sort of serious type of metaphysical infinitism, like that we could call it, can be developed. But I do have a friend who Matteo Morganti, you can look up his stuff, an Italian philosopher of science. He defends actually the idea that you could have a type of emergence coming out from an infinite structure. He compares this with infinitism with epistemology. So that's, I don't know much about that direction, but there's a view according to you could still have your explanation even if you have an infinite regress that it might not be vicious in all cases. I'm not perfectly convinced by this line of thought, but I mean I can point out his work later on. There's going to be an interesting volume, by the way, it is by Graham Priest and Rickett Bliss on this stuff, this fundamentality of infinite structures coming out. So I think there's a lot to be said about this topic, and this is actually a difficult challenge, the Gantt challenge. But I think there's a couple of ways that we could attempt to get around this. And yeah, I don't think that it's going to be a problem if the structure is self-repeating, as it were, this boring structure that I mentioned before. Because then you wouldn't have infinitely many kinds. You could just have the same kinds repeated. If it's turtles all the way down, it's just turtles. It's turtle guy that's going to do the trick. Might be some other problem. Yeah. I mean, this is exciting stuff. I really like to think about it with different forms of infinite structure that you can have, and whether you can make them palatable. Are we out of time?
We'd love to keep you forever, but that's a long time.
Well,
Thank you so much.
thank you very much for coming.
All your
Thank you very much.
participation, take your own questions, and such a great test.
Sorry about trying to pack too much stuff in.
We'll be thinking about it for a long time. Thank you.
Thank you.